Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm taking you through this roughly week-long process I had of updating our kitchen countertops by painting them. Obviously it's a much more budget-friendly solution than, buying a brand new countertop, but I have to give credit where it's due. I got this idea off a fellow YouTuber called Loving Life as Megan, so if you haven't checked her out, definitely do that. And with that, let's get started. So the most important rule with painting anything is, of course, you want the surface to be as smooth and clean as possible. So I opted to use this Degreaser by Method. It doesn't have as harsh of a chemical smell, so it's just one that I typically like to use, but it still does a nice job even without the chemicals. Next thing I did was use this frog tape here to make that barrier, to just try to limit as much as I could the paint getting on the walls or in the cabinets. I wasn't worried about it too much though, just because, as I have talked about, I plan on doing a lot more DIY projects with painting cabinets, doing stuff for the backsplash, painting the walls, and so on. So I tried to limit what I could, but just know that if you're going to try to tackle this project yourself, just probably be a little more meticulous with applying your painter's tape than I was, which you'll see at the end of the video where I had some spots where it leaked through a little bit. But again, I don't blame the tape on this. I think this was more user error because I was just trying to work fast and just had to try to make it work for my time schedule between the kids with nap time and pickup and this and that. So next thing I used was this liquid sandpaper with a green scrubby, just to scrub the countertop up and give it a scuffed surface, again, to make sure the paint is going to adhere properly. So here I just want to zoom in on this seam that I feel like is in the majority of these type of countertops, but I was really worried about if I was going to paint these countertops, I did not want this seam to show because I just feel like that would look kind of tacky. I was worried about it. So I thought if I could spackle it and try to almost fill it, that maybe it would work out once I smoothed it and sanded it down. However, spoiler alert, I'd probably skip this step, but you'll see why in the rest of the video. I was able to make it work, but I wonder if I really could have just gotten away without doing it. So next it was time to prime the counters. I used a regular brush just to get the edges, and I believe I only did one coat of primer, but then I used foam rollers to get the top of the countertops, just because I really didn't want brush strokes showing. So I just tried to work fast with the roller to try to smooth over those brush strokes as much as I could. And then I really just tried to limit the use of the brush as much as possible and just tried to tackle the majority of the countertop that I could with just using the foam roller. So as you can see, I left that corner alone because my spackle was still wet. So I just went on to this side and started priming. I do recommend having a little wet, damp paper towel on hand too, just because I did start to get a little bit on the side of my stove, which I didn't really want that to happen. So just use that and that'll work. So I just wanted to show you guys this tip if you haven't come across it before, but you can cover everything in saran wrap to like kind of preserve your paint and your brushes in between putting layers on, because again at this point I think I had to go and pick up my son, so I just covered everything with saran wrap, and then I put mine in the fridge. Also, I think it's debatable about if you really have to do that or not, but that's just what I end up doing and it works fine for me. But I just wanted to show you guys what the one coat of primer looks like on the counters. I don't claim to be the best painter. I can see that the layers are a little bit uneven, but I knew that I was going to be doing 3 coats of paint on the counters, so I wasn't really worried about it, but you know, you could always just sand it with a nice finely grit sandpaper if you are worried about it. At this point, I couldn't take my eyes off of how that spackle was looking, so I was worried, but I wanted to see what it'd look like after 3 coats of paint. So I gave it a try. That was the paint that I used. It's just a plain white chalk paint, but unfortunately, I was trying to save money and I didn't buy a new roller, and so I used one that we previously had. I had painted our bathroom vanity black color with. And so flecks of the black paint was coming off the roller onto my nice white countertop. And so I had to keep making sure that the flecks weren't there. So next time I would have just spent the few dollars and just bought a new roller. But I was trying to save money any way I could. So next time though. Another thing, if you haven't seen or heard of the trick yet to put a plastic bag, I just use like a regular small garbage bag over your painter's trays. It definitely makes cleanup a lot easier. Friendly reminder when doing this project is to check for the paint drips during the painting. I mean, this kind of, it applies to the primer, the paint, and the poly actually, but obviously drips just would not be cute. That is kind of negating the fact that you're trying to make this a nice DIY. So Just watch for the drips. That's why I was continuously going over with my roller multiple times. So I just wanted to show you guys what the countertops looked like after the one coat of primer and the one coat of paint. Obviously you can still see that there are some roller marks, but I wasn't worried about it at this point because I knew I still had 2 coats of paint to apply. So now you guys can see what the counter looks like after 3 coats. Looks a lot better, right? You don't see those roller marks as much anymore. I'm really pretty pleased with it. However, then I saw how the corner looks like with that spackle on there, and the camera I feel like doesn't even do it justice. I felt like it looked absolutely terrible. So I had to figure out what I was going to do, because, you know, the whole thing with DIY is you don't want your project to look like it's a DIY, right? So I decided to sand it. Believe me, this was after I sanded it. I was panicked here, believe me. But I also put another coat of primer on there, which is why I was glad that I saved my primer with the saran wrap. So I super slowly dabbed a couple coats of primer in, and then super slowly dabbed a couple coats of paint in, and it looks a million times better than what it did before. So now's the next step where I have to paint the countertops to get the polyacrylic put on. I'm just using a sandpaper disc. It's just what I had on hand, of 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm just very carefully sanding the surface to make the polyacrylic better to stick to, give it a better surface to stick to. And the camera's not really picking it up, but I used this opportunity to get the pet hair, again, world of having pets, that was getting caught into the paint as it was drying. But you could just gently take the sandpaper and I could get it out of the paint before I was going to put that polyacrylic on there. So after sanding, of course, you want to get that dust off of there. So I just used a microfiber cloth. You can use a tack cloth, something like that, that will take that dust off of there so that it's not there for the polyacrylic to lay on top of. And with that, it's finally time to apply the polyacrylic. I use this kind, and then I went for a higher quality brush just to limit the chance of bristles getting left behind from the shedding of it, if you will. And I just put it in a red solo cup. Typically, they recommend doing shorter brush strokes with this just because this stuff does dry pretty quick. So you want to move pretty quick, but do shorter brush strokes with, you know, just kind of like that brief overlap with each section. But you also want to make sure that you're not putting it on too thick either. It's better to do it thin, and that way, because again, I knew I was going to be doing 3 coats with this. Now you can understand how it took me like a week to be able to get this project completely finished. Also, if you've never used poly before, know that this stuff stinks really bad. It will just stink up your whole house. So please make sure you either have some windows open, fans going, all the above, just to make sure you have some airflow going in your house. Remember, after each coat of poly, you are also using a fine grit sandpaper to help make sure it's going to be nice and smooth, and then you're applying the poly. Here you can see this is where I was using the sandpaper to get pet hair out. It worked really well, so don't fret if you end up getting hair on there in the middle of your project. So later that night, I was finally able to pull the painter's tape off. I did it when I think it was right after I had applied that last coat of poly. And I was honestly terrified to do it. It was somewhat satisfying, but I was more scared that some of the paint or something was going to rip off with it. I was so worried about that. But as you can see, user error. I'm a terrible painter. I got it up on the walls, but I really don't care because I have plans for what I'm going to do to fix the backsplash to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing anyway. And if anyone noticed, I am in the process of also painting all of our wood trim white. So if part of the video this was wood and now it's white, it's because that's what I was doing in between coats waiting for things to dry. So the next step was I was going to do this white caulking around the sink just because I wanted to give it that nice clean look. Obviously there was still paint that had gotten on the sink from leaking through the painter's tape. Fortunately it scrubbed off really well though. I just used a little green scrubby and some elbow grease and it came right off. I just want to note that I waited about a day and a half before I put things back on my counter after I finished this project, just to try to make sure that poly was going to get a good amount of time to cure. But also for the next few days, if any water landed on there, I noticed it would start to kind of bubble up. So have like wipe water or anything spills on the counter, wipe it immediately. And here's the final look, guys, of the white countertops. I really think it helps this space, even if it's just by a little bit, because obviously it's only part one of the plans I have for updating this kitchen, like DIY on a budget. But I really appreciate you guys watching, and stay tuned because I think my next video is going to be how I'm going to do the backsplash in this kitchen. Budget friendly though. But thanks, guys. Bye.